The laundry basket slipped from my hands the moment she walked into the room. I hadn't heard her come downstairs. I rarely did. My daughter-in-law moved through the house like she owned every corner of it, which, I suppose, she believed she did. I was folding her husband's shirts the way I had always folded shirts, the way my mother taught me, pressing each sleeve flat with the palm of my hand before bringing the sides together. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in October, the kind of gray, soft morning that makes you want to move slowly and think about nothing in particular. She stood in the doorway of the laundry room for a moment, watching me. I smiled at her. I always smiled first. In the 8 months since I had moved into their house in Oakville, I had learned that smiling first was the safest thing I could do. Then she crossed the room in 3 steps, snatched the shirt I was holding out of my hands, and threw it onto the floor. "What is this?" she said, her voice low and controlled in the way that is somehow worse than shouting. "You've been folding his shirts like this for 8 months, and you still don't know how he likes them done?" I looked at the shirt on the floor. Then I looked at her. "I fold them the way I don't care how you've always done it." She picked up another shirt from the basket, held it up, then dropped it too. "He likes them rolled. Not folded, rolled. How many times does something have to be explained to you?" I felt the heat rise to my face, not from embarrassment, from something older and harder than embarrassment. "Patricia," I said quietly. "Don't." She held up one hand. "Just leave it. I'll do it myself. I always end up doing everything myself anyway." She walked out of the laundry room without looking back at me. I stood there alone among the fallen shirts, my hands still held in the position of folding something that was no longer there. From the living room, I heard the television go on. My son had been sitting in there the entire time. The volume went up by several notches. He had heard everything. He always heard everything. He simply chose, each time, to hear nothing at all. "My name is Evelyn Marsh. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years teaching grade 4 at Brampton Elementary School, and I raised one son, my son, Gregory, largely on my own after his father and I divorced when Gregory was 11. I worked. I saved. I kept the house on Chestnut Drive warm in winter and the garden full in summer, and I made sure my son never felt the absence of anything that truly mattered. I tell you this not because I want your sympathy. I tell you this because I need you to understand what I gave up before I tell you what I lost. My husband, my second husband, Warren, came into my life when I was 51. Gregory was already grown by then, already with Patricia, already building the life I was now an unwelcome guest inside. Warren was a quiet, steady man who worked in municipal planning and grew tomatoes in his backyard and made the best pot of coffee I had ever tasted. We had 16 years together. 16 years that felt, in the particular way that good things do, like both a long time and not nearly enough. Warren passed away in March, 2 years before that Tuesday morning in the laundry room. A heart attack, sudden and without any warning that either of us would have recognized. He was 69. He had still been planning a trip to Prince Edward Island that summer. After Warren died, I stayed in our house in Burlington for 14 months. I kept myself busy. I volunteered at the school library on Thursdays. I had dinner every second Friday with my neighbor, Ruth, who had known me long enough to say the right things and also to know when to say nothing. I grieved the way women of my generation tend to grieve quietly, completely, and mostly alone. Then Gregory called. He called on a Sunday evening in May, and his voice carried that particular warmth it only ever carried when he wanted something and had decided in advance that I would agree to it. "Mom," he said, "Patricia and I have been talking. The house is big. The kids are getting older. It would be good for everyone if you were closer." It sounded like an invitation. It sounded like love. I know now that it was neither, or at least that whatever it was far more complicated than either word could hold. I want to be precise about what happened with the finances, because I know that when women tell stories like this one, people wonder. They always wonder where the money went, as though a woman of 67 must have simply misplaced it, the way you misplace reading glasses or a grocery list. I did not misplace anything. Warren and I had owned our home in Burlington together. When it sold, 14 months after his death, it sold for $620,000. After the mortgage balance and the fees, there was just over $480,000 left. Gregory came to me with a proposal a week before the sale closed. He sat across from me at my kitchen table with printed papers and a calm, reasonable voice, and he explained that he and Patricia were looking to renovate the lower level of their house to make a proper suite for me. He said that if I contributed half the renovation costs, it would be fair. He said they had already gotten quotes. He said $160,000 would cover it comfortably, and that the money would go into a joint account that he would manage because, and here he was gentle, even kind, because handling finances had always stressed me out, hadn't it? And didn't I deserve to finally rest? I want to tell you that I said no. I want to tell you that I saw clearly what was happening. But grief does something to your judgment that nobody warns you about. It doesn't make you stupid. It makes you tired in a place behind your eyes where common sense usually lives, and when someone who is supposed to love you tells you that rest is what you deserve, you believe them. Because you are tired. Because rest is exactly what you want. I signed the financial power of attorney 2 days before the house closed. I transferred $160,000 into the joint account Gregory opened. The remaining $320,000 sat in my personal savings account, and I genuinely thought that it was mine to access whenever I needed it. I moved into the lower suite of their house in Oakville on a Saturday in June. The suite was nice. It had its own entrance, and a small kitchenette, and a window that looked out onto the backyard where my grandchildren, Nolan and Isabel, played on summer evenings. For the first 2 months, it felt, if not like home, then at least like something I could make into one. Then small things began to shift. Patricia stopped knocking before she came down. It started as forgetfulness, or what I told myself was forgetfulness, and became habit, and then became something that felt deliberate, though I could never have proven it. She commented on my cooking when I used the main kitchen. She commented on the television being too loud when I watched the news at 7 o'clock. She commented on the way I loaded the dishwasher, the way I left my shoes by the front door, the way I folded and then failed to fold the laundry. Gregory worked long hours and came home tired and sat in front of the television with a beer in his hand, and when I tried to talk to him about Patricia's behavior, he would nod slowly and say that Patricia was under a lot of stress and that I needed to try harder to understand her perspective. He said it so consistently, with such practiced calm, that I began to wonder if they had rehearsed it together. My savings account, I discovered in September, 8 months after I moved in, had been transferred. I found out the way you find out things you were never meant to find out by accident, in a moment of ordinary life. I was at the bank in downtown Oakville to deposit a check from my pension, and I asked the teller to print my balance. She slid the paper across the counter, and I looked at it, and I stood very still for a long moment, because the number on the paper was $412. Not 400,000, 412. I sat down on the bench near the door. I sat there for quite a long time. When I asked Gregory about it that evening, he said that he had moved the funds into an investment account for better returns, and that he would need to transfer it back if I wanted it, and that it would take time, and that I should have told him I needed money rather than just going to the bank on my own. He said the last part gently, the way you might speak to a child who has done something mildly reckless, and I understood, standing in that kitchen with the television playing in the next room, that the power of attorney I had signed was not protection. It was a door I had unlocked from the inside and handed him the key to. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the lower suite and listened to the house settle around me, and I thought about Chestnut Drive and Ruth and the school library on Thursdays, and I thought about Warren's tomatoes, which had come back on their own last spring even though no one had planted them, which I had decided at the time was a sign of something but wasn't sure what. The laundry room incident with Patricia happened 6 weeks after I discovered what Gregory had done with my money. By then, I had tried 3 more times to talk to him about it. Each time he had an explanation. The money was working. It would be accessible when I needed it. I was creating unnecessary anxiety. Patricia had overheard the last conversation and told me, very calmly, over dinner, that she thought I might be developing some memory issues and that perhaps I should see a doctor. I looked at her across the table. I looked at my son, who was cutting his chicken and not looking up. I looked at my grandchildren, who were talking to each other about something at school and were entirely unaware of what was happening among the adults around them. I said nothing. I finished my dinner. I went downstairs. That night, I called Ruth. Ruth Kowalski has been my neighbor, my friend, and the most practically minded person I have ever known. She is 71, she is originally from Sudbury, and she has survived 2 husbands, 1 house fire, and a financial advisor who turned out to be running a scheme that cost her $40,000 in her 50s. She is not easily alarmed, but she knows how to respond to alarm when it arrives. I told her everything, all of it, from the power of attorney to the empty savings account to Patricia's dinner table comment about my memory. There was a pause on the line. "Evelyn," Ruth said, "what you are describing has a name. It's called financial elder abuse. And what Patricia said at dinner, that's called laying groundwork. You need to talk to a lawyer before you do anything else." I had not said those words to myself, financial elder abuse. I had been calling it a misunderstanding. I had been calling it a difficult adjustment period. I had been calling it a lot of things that were easier to hold than the truth. The next morning I called Margaret Osei. Margaret was a parent at my school years ago. Her son had been in my grade 4 class, and she had gone on to become a family law and estates lawyer in Mississauga. I had not spoken to her in several years. I left a message saying only that I needed her advice on an urgent personal matter. She called me back within an hour. I met her at her office on a Thursday afternoon in late November, telling Patricia and Gregory that I was going to my doctor for a routine appointment. I took the GO train. I sat in Margaret's office and told her what I had told Ruth, and she listened without interrupting, and then she asked me a careful series of questions about the power of attorney document, about the joint account, about the exact language Gregory had used when he proposed the arrangement. "The power of attorney gives him legal authority to manage your finances," she said, "but it does not give him authority to move your personal savings without your knowledge and informed consent. What he did is, at minimum, a serious breach of his fiduciary duty. Depending on what has been done with those funds, it may constitute financial fraud." I sat with that for a moment. Fraud. My son. "There's something else you should know," Margaret said. She folded her hands on the desk. "I have a note here from my files that I want to confirm with you. Did Warren have a solicitor in Burlington, a man named Douglas Fairweather?" I said yes. Warren had used Douglas Fairweather for his will. Margaret turned her computer screen toward me. "Mr. Fairweather reached out to my office 14 months ago, looking for a way to contact you. It appears he has been trying to reach you through several channels. Did you ever receive any correspondence from his office?" I thought. I had moved twice in 14 months, first from Burlington to a temporary apartment, then to Gregory's house. My mail forwarding had been inconsistent. Patricia had sometimes brought in the mail. "No," I said slowly. "I never received anything from Douglas Fairweather." Margaret made a note. "He needs to speak with you about Warren's estate. Based on what he communicated to our office, there are assets that were not included in the primary probate that you may not be aware of." I drove back to Oakville on the GO train in the early December dark, and I watched the lights of Mississauga passing outside the window, and I thought about Warren. I thought about how he had been a quiet man, a careful man, a man who said very little but meant everything he said. I thought about a conversation we had once, very early in our marriage, when he had said to me simply, "I want you to always be okay, Evelyn, even when I'm not around. I want that to be a thing I've made sure of." I had smiled at him and said he was being morbid, and he had said, "No, I'm being practical. There's a difference." And then he'd gone back to reading his book and I'd gone back to mine, and I hadn't thought about it again until I was sitting on that train watching the lights go by in the dark. Douglas Fairweather's office was on John Street in Burlington. I went on a Friday, telling no one. He was a small, precise man in his early 70s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the careful, unhurried manner of someone who has spent decades delivering important information to people who are not ready to receive it. He shook my hand, offered me tea, and sat down across from me with a slim folder on the desk between us. "Mrs. Marsh," he said, "I am very glad we were finally able to connect. I have been trying to reach you for over a year." Warren, Douglas Fairweather told me, had made a separate legal instrument 14 months before he died. Not his main will, a separate testamentary trust. The trust held assets that Warren had accumulated independently over the years. A small investment portfolio, the proceeds from the sale of a property he had owned before we met, and a life insurance policy that had not been named in the primary estate. The total value of the trust, as of that December, was $426,000. I stared at him. "He never told you about it," Fairweather said. "It was not a question. He seemed to have expected this. He was quite deliberate about that. He left a letter for you, which I have here. Would you like a moment to read it before we continue?" The letter was handwritten, 2 pages, in Warren's careful architect's script. I will not share all of it. Some of it is mine alone. But near the end, he wrote this: "I know you, Ev. You trust people the way a good person trusts people, which is to say, too easily and with your whole heart. I know Gregory. I know that he is our son and that I love him, but I also know that he has always wanted more than what is his, and that Patricia makes that want bigger. This money is not in the main estate because I did not want it accessible to anyone but you. Douglas knows what to do. Please let him help you." I folded the letter and put it in my coat pocket and sat very still for a long moment. "Are you all right?" Mr. Fairweather asked. "Yes," I said, and then, because it was true, he always knew me better than I knew myself. What happened in the weeks after that was not dramatic in the way that some endings are. There was no confrontation at the dinner table. There was no moment where I stood in the kitchen and delivered the kind of speech that feels satisfying in the telling of it. Real life, I have found, rarely offers you those moments. What it offers instead is paperwork and patience and the company of good people who know what they are doing. Margaret O'Sea filed a formal complaint with the Ontario Public Guardian and Trustee's Office regarding the management of my finances under the power of attorney. Douglas Fairweather activated the trust and had the funds transferred into a new account in my name only, to which Gregory had no access. A forensic review of the joint account showed that of the $320,000 that had been moved from my savings, $264,000 was accounted for in the investment account. The rest, just over $56,000, had been used for household expenses, renovations, and several purchases I did not recognize and Gregory could not explain satisfactorily. Margaret told me I had grounds to pursue legal action. I thought about it for a long time. I thought about Nolan and Isabel, who had done nothing and were 8 and 10 years old and would one day be old enough to ask questions that deserved honest answers. I thought about the version of Gregory who was 11 years old and had once made me a card for Mother's Day that said, in unsteady pencil, "You are the best mom a kid could have." I have no idea why I kept that card for 33 years, but I did. I decided not to pursue legal action, but I insisted on a formal repayment arrangement for the missing $56,000, documented and signed and filed with Margaret's office. Gregory signed it. He signed it in the same chair where he had once sat across from me, with renovation quotes and a gentle voice, and he did not look at me when he signed it. Patricia said nothing to me directly. The day I brought the moving truck to collect my things, she stood in the doorway of the house with her arms crossed and watched me, and I nodded to her once, and she did not nod back. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Burlington in February, a 12-minute walk from the waterfront. Ruth came to help me unpack, and we ordered Lebanese food and sat on the floor eating it with the boxes still stacked around us, and she said, "Evelyn, I have never been more impressed with anyone in my life," and I laughed for the first time in what felt like a very long time. I planted tomatoes on the balcony in April. I don't know why. I had never grown tomatoes in my life, but something about it felt right, felt like continuing a conversation I hadn't finished yet. They grew. They did very well. Nolan and Isabel visit me every second weekend. Gregory arranged it, which tells me that some part of him knows what he did and is trying, in the only way he seems to know how, to make partial amends. I accept the visits. I make the children grilled cheese sandwiches, and we walk along the lake shore and I answer their questions as honestly as I can. Last month, Isabel asked me why I moved away from their house. I told her that sometimes adults need their own space so they can take good care of themselves, and that it had nothing to do with loving her any less. She seemed to accept that. She is 10 years old and considerably wiser than her parents give her credit for. I think about Warren often. I think about the letter in my coat pocket that I have now read many times. I think about the fact that he saw what was coming, not precisely, not every detail, but the shape of it, and he built me a door out before it happened. I think about what it means to love someone that carefully. To love them not just in the present, but into the future you won't be there for. I tell this story because I know there are women listening to it who recognize something in it. Not necessarily the exact details, but the feeling. The feeling of having trusted and found that the trust was misplaced. The feeling of wondering whether what you are experiencing has a name. The feeling of sitting on a bench in a bank in a city where you thought you were safe, looking at a number that does not match the life you believed you were living. It has a name, and knowing the name is the first step. Do not sign documents because you are tired. Grief will ask you to. Loneliness will ask you to. People who have calculated the precise moment your defenses are lowest will ask you to. The answer to all of them is the same. Not until I have spoken with my own lawyer. Not my son's suggestion of a lawyer. Not a family friend. My own. Chosen by me, paid by me, working for me. Do not give another person complete control over your money, no matter how much you love them, no matter how reasonable the explanation sounds. Love and financial oversight are not the same thing and should not be kept in the same account. Do not mistake a person's silence for neutrality. Gregory turned up the television because the silence of someone who is choosing to do nothing is not neutral. It is a choice, and you are allowed to factor it into your decisions. If something feels wrong, it may be because something is wrong. The women in your life who are older and have been through things will often know what that something is before you can name it. Call them. Call Ruth, whoever Ruth is in your life. Call her at midnight if you have to. That is what she is there for. Warren was right about one thing above all others. There is a difference between being morbid and being practical. Plan for yourself. Protect yourself. Do it before you need to, while your hands are steady and your head is clear and the possibility of needing it still feels remote and theoretical. Because it won't always feel that way. And on the day it stops feeling theoretical, you will want to have already built the door. I am 67 years old. I eat breakfast on my balcony in the mornings when the weather allows. I walk to the waterfront. I go to the library. I have dinner with Ruth every second Friday without fail. I am teaching myself, slowly, to grow things. I am, without question, the most okay I have ever been. And Warren, wherever he is probably not surprised.